Her sisters took everything, but forgot the equipment shed their mother left in her name. What she discovered inside wouldn't just give her a home. It would give her the power to reclaim her entire past. If you've ever felt left behind or underestimated, this story is for you. Stick around, and maybe think about subscribing, because we tell stories for people who know what it's like to have to fight for your own second chance. The day I turned 18 was the day I officially became homeless. It sounds more dramatic than it felt. It didn't feel like much of anything, just a quiet hum of administrative finality. For 6 years, since my mother's death, my life had been a series of rooms I didn't belong in, supervised by people paid to care. Now, the payments were stopping. I was standing in the narrow hallway of the group home, my entire life packed into a single black duffel bag and a cardboard box that smelled faintly of the instant oatmeal that had been my breakfast for 2,190 mornings. Sarah, the house manager, gave my shoulder a squeeze that was meant to be reassuring but felt more like she was checking to see if I was real. "You got your paperwork?" she asked, her voice tired. It was always tired. I nodded, patting the front pocket of my worn hoodie where the folded papers sat. My birth certificate, my social security card, a final check for $250 from the state, and a bus pass that was good for 24 hours. The starter kit for a life I didn't know how to start. "And the address for the shelter?" "They're expecting you, Chloe." I nodded again. The address was a place I had walked past 100 times. A grim brick building with barred windows where men and women lined up in the evenings, their faces hollowed out by the cold. I had no intention of going there. Not yet. Not while the $250 felt like a fortune. "Okay then," she said, her duty discharged. She opened the front door, and the raw, damp air of a March morning rushed in, smelling of wet pavement and exhaust fumes. This was it. The grand finale. No cake. No party. Just a duffel bag and a door held open for you to leave. As I stepped over the threshold, Sarah said, "Wait. One more thing. This came for you." A law firm. She handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope. It felt impossibly heavy and important. The front was embossed with the name Abernathy, Cole and Finch. My name, Chloe and Morgan, was typed precisely in the center. I stared at it. Legal mail usually meant trouble. It meant a hearing, a placement change, a formal notice that your life was once again being decided by strangers in a room you weren't invited into. "Probably just a formality," Sarah added, already closing the door on my back. "Some final notice from the estate. Don't worry about it." The door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the empty space where my childhood used to be. I was alone on the cracked concrete steps, the city roaring around me. The envelope a solid, terrifying weight in my hand. The estate. My mother's estate. That was a joke. My older half-sisters, Brianna and Megan, had made sure of that. After Mom died, they had descended on the small farm we'd grown up on like vultures. They were from her first marriage, 10 and 12 years older than me, and they had never seen me as anything more than a consequence of their mother's second, happier life. They saw me as the reason their own father was replaced. They took the house, the land, the savings. They sold her car, her jewelry, every piece of furniture that had a scrap of value. They told the social worker there was nothing left for me, that they couldn't possibly take in a traumatized 12-year-old. So I went into the system and they went on with their lives. I hadn't heard from them since, except for a single sterile Christmas card the first year. So what could a law firm possibly want with me? I walked, the duffel bag bumping against my leg, the strap digging into my shoulder. I didn't go towards the bus station or the shelter. I went to a small park a few blocks away, a sad patch of green with a single skeletal tree. I sat on a cold bench and held the envelope. My hands were shaking. Maybe it was a bill. Maybe they'd discovered some debt my mother had left, and now that I was a legal adult, they were coming for me. For what? The state-issued check in my pocket? I tore the seal. The paper inside was thick, expensive. The letter was short, formal. It was from a man named Arthur Abernathy, senior partner. He stated that he had been the executor of my mother's will and had been holding a small, specific item in trust for me until my 18th birthday. He wrote, a final bequest. He requested I make an appointment to see him at my earliest convenience to take possession of said bequest. A bequest. A word I only knew from old movies. I looked at the bottom of the letter. It was dated a week ago. He had been waiting for me. I felt a strange, hollow flutter in my chest. Something had been waiting for me for 6 years. Something my sisters had missed. I stood up, the letter clutched in my hand. The address for the law firm was downtown, in one of the tall, glass buildings that scraped the sky. I looked at my reflection in a puddle. A girl with a pale, thin face and eyes that were too big, dressed in clothes that screamed charity bin. I was nobody. And I was about to walk into a place where everybody was somebody. But what choice did I have? My other option was a cot in a room full of ghosts. I pulled my hood up, squared my shoulders, and started walking toward the address on the letterhead. My 24-hour bus pass could wait. My new life, whatever it was starting right now. The lobby of Abernathy, Cole and Finch was designed to make people like me feel small. The ceilings were impossibly high. The floor was polished marble that reflected a distorted, elongated version of me, and the air smelled of lemon polish and money. A woman with a severe haircut and a voice as smooth and cold as the marble floor looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she sincerely doubted it. I held out the letter, my hand still trembling slightly.
I'm Chloe Morgan.
I think I have an appointment with Mr. Abernathy. Her eyes flickered from my face to my duffel bag and back again. A tiny, perfect frown line appeared between her eyebrows. One moment, she spoke into a headset, her voice a low murmur. I stood there, feeling the weight of every person in a tailored suit who walked past me. They moved with a purpose I couldn't imagine possessing. I felt like a stray animal that had wandered into a cathedral. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, the woman said, "Third floor. Mr. Abernathy's assistant will meet you." The elevator was silent and swift. It opened onto a hushed, carpeted hallway. A woman who looked like a younger, slightly less severe version of the one in the lobby was waiting for me. "Miss Morgan?" This way, Mr. Abernathy's office was at the end of the hall. It was bigger than my entire room at the group home. One whole wall was a window with a panoramic view of the city. Books lined the other walls from floor to ceiling. In the center of it all, behind a vast wooden desk, sat a man who looked as old as the books. He was thin and stooped, with a cloud of white hair and skin as pale and translucent as parchment. He wore a tweed jacket that looked rumpled and comfortable. He looked up as I entered, and his eyes, magnified by thick glasses, were surprisingly kind. "Miss Morgan, Chloe, please come in. Sit down." His voice was dry, like rustling leaves. I sat in the leather chair opposite him. I sighed as I sank into it. My duffel bag sat on the floor beside me like an accusation. "Thank you for coming so promptly," he said, folding his hands on the desk. "Happy birthday, by the way. I imagine this is a strange way to spend it." I just nodded, unable to find my voice. "I was your mother's lawyer," he began, his gaze steady. "For many years. She was a remarkable woman. Very specific." He paused, looking at a file on his desk. It was thick and old. My mother's name was on the tab. When she passed, there was the matter of her estate. As you may or may not know, the majority of the assets, the house, the surrounding acreage, were passed to your half-sisters Brianna and Megan, as per the terms of a pre-existing marital agreement with her first husband. It was not, I assure you, her preference. His words were carefully chosen, but the meaning was clear. Mom was trapped. She fought it, he continued softly, but the agreement was ironclad. After she was gone, there was very little I could do. Your sisters chose to liquidate the primary assets and were not inclined to provide for you beyond what the state mandated. That was a gentle way of putting it. "However," he said, leaning forward slightly, "your mother was, as I said, specific and clever. Years before she passed, she made a small, separate transaction. She purchased a quarter-acre plot of land, a tiny, seemingly insignificant parcel that was carved out from the main property line. On that plot stands a single structure, an old equipment shed." He slid a folded document across the desk. It was a deed. My name was at the top. Chloe and Morgan. She put the deed in your name but placed it in trust with me, with the explicit instruction that it was not to be transferred to you until you came of age. She was afraid, I believe, that if your sisters knew of it, they would have found a way to contest it or force a sale while you were a minor. They never knew. In the chaos of the estate settlement, this tiny, worthless parcel was overlooked. They took the farm, but they forgot the shed. I stared at the paper. Piece of land. A shed. It was mine. The thought was so alien I couldn't quite grasp it. So, what does that mean? I finally managed to ask. It means, he said, a faint, dry smile touching his lips, that you are a landowner, Miss Morgan. Is not much. The tax assessment values the property at less than $5,000. It's essentially a dilapidated outbuilding on a patch of weeds. But it is yours. Free and clear. He then reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, tarnished brass key tied with a faded piece of red ribbon. This is also yours. I took the key. It was cold and heavy in my palm. The metal was worn smooth in places. I imagined my mother's hand holding it, turning it in a lock. Your sisters, he said, his tone shifting back to business, are in the final stages of selling the entire farm to a development corporation, Horizon Properties. They're planning to build a luxury housing community, he sighed. The sale is due to close in a few weeks. Your parcel is adjacent to it, but not part of the sale. Legally, they can't touch it. What you do with it is up to you. You could try to sell it to the developers. They might offer you a few thousand for it just to tidy up the map. Or you could keep it. He looked at me over his glasses. Your mother never told me why she did this, not in so many words. She just said you would know what to do when the time came. He stood up, a signal that our meeting was over. I have a bus ticket for you to Northwood. The stop is about 2 miles from the farm. It's the best I can do. I stood up too, my mind reeling. A deed, a key, a piece of land that my sisters had forgotten. Felt like a dream. Mr. Abernathy, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Why did you do this? Hold it for all these years. He looked out the window at the sprawling city below. Your mother paid me a retainer, a very long time ago. The final instruction was to see this through. It was a matter of professional duty, he said. But then he turned back to me, and the kindness was back in his eyes. And she made me promise. She loved you a great deal, Chloe. Don't ever doubt that. He walked me to the door. As I stepped back into the hushed hallway, he said one last thing. Be careful. A forgotten thing can sometimes be more valuable than anyone realizes. I walked out of that building, the deed in my pocket, the key clutched in my hand. The $250 felt like nothing now. The bus ticket to Northwood felt like everything. I was going home, or at least to the one tiny piece of it that was still mine. The bus ride was a journey backward in time. The sleek, glass towers of the city gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to strip malls, and finally, to the open, rolling countryside of my childhood. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window and watched the landscape of my memory unfold. The city had always felt temporary, a gray holding pen. This felt real. The green of the fields, the dark, tangled woods, the wide, empty sky. Every mile the bus traveled, the knot of anxiety in my stomach loosened, replaced by a strange, fragile hope. I remembered this road. I remembered leaning my head against the same cool glass on the school bus, watching the seasons change across these fields. I remembered my mother driving this road, her hand resting on the gear shift, humming along to a song on the radio. Her name was Sarah, just like the house manager. A cosmic joke I never found funny. My mother was the opposite of tired. She was vibrant, her hands always busy, fixing a tractor engine, sanding a piece of wood, kneading dough. She smelled of sawdust and motor oil and the wild roses that grew along the fence line. My sisters, Brianna and Megan, were already teenagers when I was small. They lived in their own world of boys and makeup and whispered secrets. They were city girls at heart, their father a wealthy man from a different life. The farm was their mother's strange hobby, a place they were stuck in on weekends. For me, it was the whole world. I was my mother's shadow, following her from the barn to the workshop, my small hands trying to mimic her capable ones. She taught me how to identify birds by their song, how to change a tire, how to tell when the soil was ready for planting. She taught me to be self-reliant, a lesson I hadn't understood the importance of until she was gone. The bus rumbled on. I thought about the shed. It wasn't just a shed. It was her sanctuary. The main farmhouse was full of the ghosts of her first marriage, the furniture and decor chosen by a man she no longer loved. But the shed was all hers. She'd built the workbench herself, run the electricity out from the house, organized every tool on the pegboard walls with meticulous care. It was where she went to think, to create, to be herself. And she had left it to me. Why? Why not a letter? Why not a phone call in all those years? The pain of that question was a familiar ache. In the group home, late at night, I would torture myself with it. Had she not loved me enough to make a better plan? Had she just given up? Mr. Abernathy's words echoed in my head. She loved you a great deal, Chloe. Don't ever doubt that it was easy for him to say. He hadn't spent 6 years staring at a calendar, waiting for a letter that never came. The bus slowed, its air brakes hissing. Northwood General Store, the driver called out. My stop. I grabbed my duffel bag and walked to the front of the bus. The driver, a man with a weathered face and a kind smile, looked at me. You look a little familiar, he said. You from around here? A long time ago, I said. Just visiting, he nodded. Well, welcome back. Then, I stepped off the bus into a world that was utterly changed and yet exactly the same. The Northwood General Store was still there, its red paint faded and peeling. But across the street, a new, glossy sign announced the future. Coming soon. The Horizon Estates at Northwood. Luxury living, country charm. A picture showed sprawling, identical houses with 3-car garages, all crowded onto the land I knew as my home. My stomach churned. This was what my sisters were doing, wiping it all away for a payout. I started walking. The farm was 2 miles down a cracked asphalt road. The air was cleaner here, filled with the scent of damp earth and pine. It was quiet. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the gravel shoulder and the distant caw of a crow. After about 30 minutes, I saw it. The long, winding driveway, the familiar line of maple trees, and at the end of it, the house. My house. Except it wasn't. A huge, garish for sale sign was staked into the front lawn, with sold slapped across it in a bold red banner. The paint on the house was peeling, the porch was sagging, and the gardens my mother had tended so carefully were overgrown with weeds. It looked abandoned, unloved. My sisters hadn't just sold it. They had let it die. I felt a surge of cold anger. They hadn't even bothered to maintain it. They just waited for the check. I didn't go toward the house. I skirted the edge of the property, following the old wire fence line, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw it. Set back from the main barn, half hidden by overgrown lilac bushes, was the shed. It was smaller than I remembered, its gray wood weathered by years of sun and snow. The roof was sagging a little on one side, and a pane of glass in the single window was cracked. It looked just as neglected as the rest of the place. But it was still standing. I pushed through the scratchy branches of the lilac bushes, my feet sinking into the soft, wet ground. I stood before the door. The wood was rough under my fingertips. The lock was rusted, a dark orange against the gray wood. I pulled the key from my pocket. The red ribbon was a tiny splash of color in the monochrome landscape. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. What if it didn't work? What if this was all some cruel joke? I pushed the key in. It resisted, then slid home with a gritty click. I turned it. For a second, nothing happened. I put my shoulder against the door and pushed. With a groan of protest, the door swung inward, opening into darkness. A wave of air washed over me, and I froze. It was the smell of her. Under the dust and the damp and the decay, it was there. Faint, but unmistakable. Oil, sawdust, and something else. the ghost of her perfume. I took a step inside, out of the gray afternoon and into the past. The interior of the shed was a world preserved in dust. A single beam of light from the cracked window cut through the gloom, illuminating a million dancing dust motes. Everything was covered in a thick, soft gray blanket. The pegboard walls were still there, but the tools hanging from them were faint outlines, their shapes softened by time. A cobweb, thick as yarn, stretched from a hanging lamp to the workbench. It was like stepping into a photograph that had been left to fade in the sun. I set my duffel bag down, the sound muffled by the dust on the floor. For a long moment, I just stood there, breathing it all in. It was a mausoleum, but it was the first place in 6 years that felt like it had ever belonged to me. My eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light. I could see the shapes more clearly now. The old drill press in the corner. The table saw, covered with a stiff, dusty tarp. And the workbench. Her workbench. It ran the length of the back wall, made of thick, scarred timber. I ran my hand over its surface, leaving a clean streak in the dust. I could feel the nicks and gouges in the wood, a history of her work written in the scars. On the wall above the bench, a calendar was still tacked to the wall. It was from 6 years ago. The month was May. She had circled a date in red. The day she died. A wave of grief, so sharp and sudden it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. I leaned against the workbench, my breath catching in my throat. It was all still here, waiting. I started to explore, moving slowly, methodically. It was part of the pacing instruction. Key action sequences, traveling, searching, digging, opening boxes, reading letters, are described step by step to build tension. I pulled the tarp off the table saw. Underneath, the machine was pristine, its metal surfaces coated in a thin layer of protective oil. She had prepared it for a long sleep. I opened drawers. They were filled with neatly organized screws, nails, and bolts, all in little glass jars with handwritten labels. Sockets and wrenches lay in foam cutouts, each in its proper place. This wasn't abandonment. This was preservation. On a shelf above the window, I found a row of wooden birds, each one half-carved. A blue jay with one wing outstretched. Cardinal, its crest just beginning to take shape. Her last project, left unfinished. I picked one up, the wood smooth in my hand. I remembered her sitting on the porch steps, a block of wood in one hand and a carving knife in the other, showing me how to follow the grain. "You don't carve the wood," she used to say. "You just uncover the bird that's already inside." I felt like that block of wood, something trapped, waiting to be uncovered. Then I saw it. Tucked under the workbench, almost hidden in the deep shadows, was a heavy-duty metal footlocker. It was military green with sturdy latches on the front. It wasn't dusty like everything else. It looked clean, wiped down. My heart started to beat faster. This was different. This was placed here. I knelt on the cold concrete floor and pulled the locker out. It was heavy. The latches were stiff, but not rusted. I lifted them, and they sprang open with a sharp metallic snap. But there was a hasp for a padlock, and it was locked. A thick, brass padlock held it shut. Of course. Another key. I searched my pockets, my bag. Nothing. I looked around the shed, my eyes scanning every surface. On the pegboard, among the outlines of hammers and saws, was a single, small hook with nothing on it. But right above it, someone had written a word in pencil, so faintly it was almost invisible. Patience. I stared at the word. It was her handwriting. Patience. A message. I thought back to her lessons. When you're stuck, Chloe, don't force it. Just stop. Look at the problem from a different angle. I stood up and looked around the shed again. Not for a key, but for something that didn't belong. My eyes fell on the row of half-carved birds. One of them, a small, simple sparrow, was different from the others. It wasn't made of the same light-colored pine. It was a darker, heavier wood. And it was finished, perfectly smooth, with no tool marks. I picked it up. It felt solid, heavier than it should. I shook it. Something rattled inside. My breath caught. I examined it closely. On the bottom, where the bird's feet would be, was a tiny, almost invisible seam. I twisted the base. It didn't move. I twisted it the other way. With a soft click, the bottom of the bird came loose. It was a tiny, carved wooden box. And nestled inside on a bed of faded velvet was a small, ornate silver key. It wasn't a door key. It was a padlock key. I knelt by the footlocker again, the wooden bird in one hand and the silver key in the other. My mother hadn't just left me a shed. She had left me a puzzle. A test. I slid the key into the padlock. Turned as smoothly as if it were brand new. The shackle sprang open. I took a deep breath, and I lifted the lid of the footlocker. The air that rose from the open footlocker was dry and smelled of paper and time. My eyes, accustomed to the gloom, took a moment to register what I was seeing. The first thing I saw was money. Bundles of it. Not neat, bank-wrapped stacks, but used, folded bills held together with rubber bands that were starting to crack with age. 50s and hundreds. I reached in and touched one. The paper was soft, worn. I had no idea how much was there. Thousands. Maybe tens of thousands. My mind couldn't process it. This was more money than I had ever seen in my life. The $250 in my pocket felt like a joke. Next to the money were stacks of photographs, tied with string. I lifted the top stack. The first photo was of my mother, young and smiling, leaning against a beat-up pickup truck. She looked happy, carefree. The next was of her holding me as a baby, her face buried in my neck. I had never seen that picture before. I flipped through them. Me on a swing. Me with a face covered in chocolate cake. Me and her, hands covered in paint, grinning at the camera. There were no pictures of Brianna or Megan. This was our history, a history my sisters had tried to erase. Beneath the photos was a thick manila envelope, sealed with wax. My name was written on the front in my mother's elegant looping script. For Chloe. On her 18th birthday, this was it. The letter I had been waiting 6 years for. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the seal. I pulled out the folded pages. The paper was thin, almost translucent. I unfolded them and began to read. My dearest Chloe, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means you have made it. You are 18. And it means you were clever enough to find the key. I knew you would be. You always saw the things other people missed. First, I am sorry. I am so sorry that I am not there to say this to you in person. My heart breaks with every word I write, knowing I will not see the woman you have become. Please do not think for 1 second that my leaving was a choice. My body has betrayed me, but my love for you, my fierce, endless love for you, has never wavered. I had to stop. Tears were blurring the words. I wiped them away with the back of my dusty hand and kept reading. I know you must have questions. So many questions. And you must be angry. You have every right to be. I want to try to explain. The money in this box is everything I could save without your sister's father knowing. For years, every side job, every piece of furniture I sold, every dollar I could skim from the household budget, I put away. For you. It's not a fortune, but it's a start. It's enough for you to get a small apartment, to go to community college, to breathe. This freedom money, my love. Use it to build a life that is yours and yours alone. I looked at the bundles of cash. Freedom money. The phrase echoed in my soul. I know what Brianna and Megan are like. The letter continued, and the tone shifted. It became harder, angrier. They have their father's heart, which is to say, they have a hole where a heart should be. I knew they would not care for you. I knew they would see you as an obstacle. That is why I could not leave you anything in the will, not directly. Their father's lawyers would have torn it apart and left you with nothing. So I did the only thing I could think of. I bought this little piece of land, this shed, our place. I put it in your name and hid it in a trust, praying they would overlook it in their greed. It seems they did. She was right. They had been so focused on the big prize, the house and the acres, that they hadn't even noticed the crumb she'd broken off for me. This shed, Chloe, is more than just a building. It is the only thing on this earth that is truly yours. It is a foundation. What you build on it is up to you. You can take the money and run. I would not blame you. Go see the ocean. Go to a city where no one knows your name. Be happy. That is all I have ever wanted for you. But there is another option. And this is the hard part. I held my breath. This farm, she wrote, is not just dirt and wood. It is our story. It is the place your grandmother was born. It is where I learned to be strong. I know your sisters see it as a commodity, a thing to be sold. I cannot bear the thought of it being turned into a soulless suburb, all beige houses and pristine lawns. I would rather see it burned to the ground. But I was powerless to stop them. The law was on their side. But I am a mechanic, my love. And a mechanic knows that sometimes the smallest, most overlooked part can bring the whole machine to a grinding halt. What did that mean? I read the line again. The smallest part. I have left you a choice, Chloe. It is a heavy one, and I am sorry for that. The choice is hidden here in this shed. In the place I built my own independence. Look at the workbench. The one we built together. Remember what I told you about foundations. A good foundation has secrets. Find the secret and you will find your power. Whatever you choose, know this. I did not abandon you. I armed you. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Forever, Mom. I finished the letter, the pages trembling in my hands. I cried. I cried for the years I had spent feeling alone, feeling forgotten. I cried for the mother I had lost and for the woman I had just found again in these pages. She hadn't left me. She had been waiting for me. She had left me a puzzle, a legacy, and a weapon. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my pocket. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in my chest, but now it was joined by something else. A fierce, burning resolve. I looked at the cash. Freedom money. I could leave. I could walk out of this shed and never look back. The thought was intoxicating. No sisters, no broken-down farm, no ghosts. Just me and a future I could buy. But then I looked around the shed, at the half-carved birds, at the calendar still hanging on the wall. I looked at her workbench. A good foundation has secrets. I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. For a long time, I just sat on the cold concrete floor. The contents of the footlocker spread around me. The smell of old paper and dust filled the air, a scent I was beginning to associate with the truth. My mother's letter was a key, but it had unlocked a room full of more doors. On one side, a door marked escape. Behind it was a new life, bought and paid for with the cash in this box. Clean break. A life where I wasn't Chloe Morgan, the orphan from the forgotten farm, but just Chloe. Someone new. The temptation was immense, a physical pull. It would be so easy. I could be on a bus heading west by nightfall. No one would even know I had been here. My sisters would sell the land, the developers would build their plastic houses, and this last piece of my mother's world would be paved over. The thought should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt like a betrayal. On the other side was a door marked Fight. It was a dark, heavy door with no handle and no keyhole. Her letter was a riddle. The smallest part can bring the whole machine to a grinding halt. And the clue. Look at the workbench. A good foundation has secrets. I got up and walked over to the workbench. It was massive, built from thick beams of Douglas fir. The top a solid slab of maple, 2 inches thick. It was scarred and stained with oil and paint, a testament to years of hard work. I ran my hands over it just as I had before, but this time I was searching. I knocked on the legs. Solid. I ran my fingers along the underside of the top. Smooth except for the grain of the wood. I pulled out the drawers again, emptying them onto the floor. Screws, bolts, old rags, a half-eaten bag of sunflower seeds. Nothing. I felt a surge of frustration. Was I crazy? Was I chasing a ghost? Misinterpreting the words of a dying woman? Maybe she was just being poetic. Maybe the real gift was the money, and the rest was just sentiment. The freedom money was right there. Tangible. Real. I could count it. The power she mentioned was just a metaphor. I picked up a bundle of hundreds. Felt heavy, solid. This could get me a deposit on an apartment, a used car, a whole new wardrobe. Could buy me anonymity. Could buy me a future that wasn't haunted by the past. The weight of the last 6 years pressed down on me. The loneliness, the feeling of being disposable, the constant low-grade humiliation of being a ward of the state. I deserved this easy way out, didn't I? I had earned it. I sank back to the floor, my head in my hands. What would she want me to do? The letter said, "Be happy. That is all I have ever wanted for you." Taking the money and leaving seemed like the most direct path to happiness. Staying, fighting my sisters, getting tangled up in a legal battle I couldn't possibly win. That sounded like the opposite of happiness. It sounded like more pain, more struggle. Have you ever been at a crossroads like that? Where one path is clear and easy, and the other is overgrown and full of shadows, but it's the only one that leads back to who you are. If you're watching this and you've had to make a choice like that in your life, let me know in the comments. Sometimes just knowing you're not the only one to face that kind of decision makes all the difference. Because in that moment, I felt completely and utterly alone. I pulled out my phone. It was an old, cracked smartphone from the group home's donation bin, but it had a signal. 1 bar. I dialed the number on the letterhead for Abernathy, Cole, and Finch. A crisp, professional voice answered. I asked for Mr. Abernathy, expecting to be told he was busy, to be put on hold for an hour. But after only a moment, his dry, rustling voice came on the line. "Miss Morgan? Is everything all right?" "I'm here," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm at the shed." There was a long pause. "And?" he asked, his voice cautious. "I found it. A box. There's money in it. A lot of money. And a letter." I could hear him take a slow, deliberate breath. "I see," he said. "Your mother was indeed a remarkable woman. She wrote about the farm," I said, my words tumbling out. "About my sisters selling it. She said she left me a choice, a way to stop it. She said to look at the workbench. But I've looked everywhere. There's nothing here." I sounded desperate, childish. "Miss Morgan, Chloe," he said, his voice softening. "Take a breath. Your mother, as I told you, was very specific. She was also a craftswoman. Craftsmen don't think like lawyers or businessmen. They think about how things are put together. They see the seams. They understand joinery. She didn't say look on the workbench or in it. She said look at it." I stood up and stared at the workbench again, the phone pressed to my ear. "Look at how it's built," he continued gently. "It's a foundation," she said. "What is the most important part of a foundation?" "The part you don't see?" I whispered. "Precisely," he said. "The part that bears the load." I knelt down again, my eyes tracing the lines of the massive legs. They were thick, square posts bolted to the floor. But one of them, the one in the back left corner, looked different. The grain of the wood was slightly mismatched at the bottom, just above the floor. And there was a dark line, almost invisible in the gloom. A seam. It wasn't one solid post. The bottom was a separate block. I pushed on it. Nothing. I tried to pry it with my fingers. The seam was too tight. I looked around, my eyes landing on a thin, stiff putty knife lying on the floor. I picked it up and carefully slid the blade into the hairline crack. I wiggled it gently. I felt a faint click, a hidden catch releasing. I held my breath and pulled. A section of the leg, about 6 inches high, slid out like a drawer. It was a perfectly constructed, hidden compartment. And inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was another package. My hands were shaking again. "I found it," I whispered into the phone. "There's a compartment. In one of the legs." "I'll be damned," Mr. Abernathy murmured. "She actually did it." "What do I do?" I asked. "Open it, Chloe," he said. "And then you call me back. And whatever you do, do not speak to your sisters until we have talked again. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said. "I understand." I hung up the phone and turned my attention to the package. This was the second part of the test. The real inheritance. The hard choice. I unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside were 2 things. The first was a set of legal documents, folded and held together with a paperclip. The second was another envelope, smaller than the first, with a single word on it, "Courage." The documents were cool and crisp in my hands. The paper felt different from my mother's letter. Stiff, official, impersonal. I unfolded the top one. It was a property survey map, professionally drawn. It showed the entire 150-acre farm, outlined in a thick black line. And cutting right through the middle of it like a scar was a thin, narrow rectangle. The label next to it read, Parcel B7, 025 acres. Owner, Chloe and Morgan, my shed. It was a tiny island in the middle of my sister's sea. But that wasn't the important part. The important part was a dotted line that ran from the main road, straight down the length of my tiny parcel, and then branched out to service the rest of the farm. The line was labeled Primary Utility and Access Easement. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but it sounded important. I put the map aside and picked up the next document. It was a copy of the county zoning application filed by Horizon Properties. It was thick with technical drawings, environmental impact statements, and financial projections. I flipped through it, my eyes glazing over at the jargon. But then I found the part that mattered. A site plan for their proposed Horizon Estates 50 luxury homes, a community center, a pool, and there, on their own map, was my little rectangle of land. They had drawn their main access road and all their primary water, sewer, and power lines running directly through it. The dotted line on my mother's map was the artery for their entire project. They had assumed it was part of the sale. They had based their whole multimillion-dollar plan on a piece of land they didn't own. A piece of land they didn't even know existed. A cold, clear understanding washed over me. This was the weapon, the small, overlooked part that could bring the whole machine to a halt. Without access through my quarter-acre, their 150 acres were virtually worthless. They couldn't build their road. They couldn't run their utilities. They couldn't do anything. My mother, with her mechanic's mind, had found the one fatal flaw in the system and had put the kill switch in my hand. I finally understood the depth of her planning, the sheer brilliance of her love. She hadn't just left me money. She had left me leverage. She had left me justice, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden in the leg of a workbench. My hands were steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I picked up the last envelope. The one that said courage. I opened it. The letter inside was short, just a single page. My brave girl, it began. Now you know. Now you hold the key not just to the shed, but to the whole farm. This is your true inheritance. Not the land itself, but the choice. What you hold in your hands is a veto. It is the power to say no. Your sisters and the men in suits will come to you now. They will find out about this tiny, inconvenient piece of paper. First, they will try to dismiss you. Then they will try to bully you. And when that doesn't work, they will offer you money. A lot of money. More than is in the footlocker. It will be the easiest money you will ever make. All you have to do is sign a piece of paper, and all your problems will disappear. I could feel the weight of that choice settling on me. You can take their money, Chloe. If you do, you will be comfortable. You will be secure. And a part of you will die. The part of you that knows what this land means. The part of you that is me. Or you can say no. You can stand your ground on this tiny patch of earth. It will be the hardest thing you have ever done. They will threaten you. They will sue you. They will try to break you. It will be a long, ugly fight. You may not win, but you will have honored our past. You will have protected our home. The final paragraph was a gut punch. I cannot tell you which to choose. A mother's love is not about command. It is about empowerment. I armed you, I did not aim you. This is your life, your future. But I will tell you this, true wealth is not something you can deposit in a bank. It is the ground beneath your feet. It is the story you choose to live. Whatever you decide, I am proud of you. Be brave. Your loving mom. I folded the letter and put it with the first one. I now had a complete picture. The money was for the fight. The deed was the weapon. The letters were the mission briefing. She had thought of everything. She had known me better than I knew myself. She knew I would be tempted by the easy way out, but she also knew that deep down, I was her daughter. And her daughter wasn't a runner. The silence in the shed felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of purpose. I looked at the tools on the wall, the half-finished birds, the sturdy workbench. This wasn't just a shed. It was a command center. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. I had a feeling I knew who it was. The developers must have gotten the news from the title search company. The machine was grinding to a halt, and they had found the part that was jamming the gears. Me. I took a deep breath, the words from the letter echoing in my head. First, they will try to dismiss you. I answered the phone. Hello? Hello? Is this Chloe Morgan? The voice was a woman's, sharp and impatient. It was a voice I hadn't heard in 6 years, but I recognized it instantly. It was my sister, Brianna. This is she, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. Chloe? My God, where have you been? She asked, her tone a perfect blend of fake concern and genuine annoyance. We've been trying to find you. The state had no forwarding address. I've been around, I said, my voice flat. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of hearing my story. Well, listen, something has come up. It's a bit of a snag with the farm sale, she said, trying to sound casual. It's some stupid legal thing, a paperwork error from years ago. Apparently, Mom put the old tool shed on a separate title, and she put it in your name. It's ridiculous. It's worthless, of course, but the buyers are being pains about it. They need it cleared up to get the access road built. I said nothing. I just let her talk. So, she continued, the impatience growing in her voice. We need you to sign a quitclaim deed. Our lawyer will send it over. You just sign it and it's all taken care of. We'll even give you a little something for your trouble. How about $5,000? You could use $5,000, right? $5,000. She said it like she was offering a child a piece of candy. It was insulting. It was exactly what my mother predicted. I thought about the cash in the footlocker. I thought about the survey map. I thought about the word courage. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silence with the force of a slammed door. There was a stunned pause on the other end of the line. What? What do you mean, no? Brianna sputtered. It's a pile of rotten wood, Chloe. What are you going to do with it? I looked around the dusty, sacred space. I looked at my mother's workbench. I'm going to live here, I said. The silence on the other end of the phone was monumental. I could practically hear Brianna's brain short-circuiting. It was a silence filled with disbelief, then confusion, and finally, a slow dawning rage. You're going to what? She finally hissed, the fake concern gone, replaced by pure, undiluted venom. You can't live in a shed, you little idiot. It's not even habitable. There's no water, no septic. Are you insane? I'll figure it out, I said, my voice still quiet. The calmness was unnerving her, I could tell. She had expected me to be a grateful, pathetic charity case. She wasn't prepared for this. Listen to me, Chloe, she said, her voice dropping into a threatening register. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you are not going to ruin this for us. Megan and I have been working on this sale for 2 years. This is our future, not yours. The words hung in the air. It's my future, too, I said. This shed is all I have left of her. You took everything else. We took what was rightfully ours, she shrieked. We were her daughters when you were just an accident. We took care of everything after she died while you were carted off by the state. You have no idea what we went through. I almost laughed. It was such a hollow, self-serving version of the truth. They had gone through her belongings, picking out the valuables. They had gone through her bank accounts. That's what they had gone through. I'm not signing anything, Brianna, I said, my tone final. You and the developers can figure out a new plan. One that doesn't involve my property. Your property? She scoffed. It's a shack on a patch of dirt. We'll give you $10,000. Final offer. Take it or we'll take you to court and have you declared incompetent. We'll get it anyway, the threat my mother had predicted. Bullying. Then I guess I'll see you in court, I said, and I hung up. My hand was shaking as I put the phone down, but my heart was steady. The choice had been made. The first shot had been fired. I immediately dialed Mr. Abernathy. I explained the conversation, repeating Brianna's offer and her threat as accurately as I could. He listened patiently. "Good," he said when I was finished. "You did exactly the right thing. Do not engage with them again. Let them talk to me from now on. They won't sue you for incompetence. It's a baseless threat and they know it. But they will try other things." "Like what?" I asked. "The developers, Horizon Properties, they won't go through your sister. They'll come directly to you. Their offer will be much, much higher. Life-changingly high. You need to be prepared for that." He was right. 2 days later, a sleek black car I didn't recognize rolled down the long driveway. It didn't stop at the house. It drove slowly past the barn and parked as close to the shed as it could get. A man in an expensive suit and shiny shoes got out. He looked deeply uncomfortable, picking his way through the muddy ground. He knocked on the shed door. I opened it. He was younger than I expected, with a smooth, practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Chloe Morgan?" he asked. I nodded. "My name is David Chun. I'm with Horizon Properties," he said, extending a hand. I didn't take it. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "I understand there's been a small complication with our Northwood project. A title issue. I'm here to clear it up." "It's not a complication," I said. "It's my property." Of course," he said smoothly. "And we fully respect that. We are prepared to purchase your parcel from you. Your sister mentioned an offer of $10,000. That's frankly insulting. For a parcel with such strategic importance, we are prepared to offer you $100,000. He said the number and watched my face, looking for a reaction. $100,000. I felt my breath catch. That wasn't just freedom money. That was a new life. A whole new universe. I could go to a real university, travel the world, never work a day in my life for years. All I had to do was sign a paper. My mother's words echoed in my head. "It will be the easiest money you will ever make. And a part of you will die." I looked past him, at the neglected farmhouse, the overgrown fields, the line of maple trees my great-grandfather had planted. I looked at the sold sign, a wound on the landscape. "No, thank you," I said. His smile vanished completely. "I don't think you understand, Miss Morgan. This is a very generous, one-time offer." "I understand perfectly," I said. "The answer is no, 250,000, he said, his voice tight. "That's my final offer. You will not get a better one. You can take this money and walk away from this ruin. Or you can have nothing." "What's it going to be?" $250,000. It was an astronomical sum. It was more money than my mother had managed to save in a lifetime. But it wasn't about the money. It never was. "I already have something," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I have this, and it's not for sale." I closed the door in his face. The immediate aftermath was a strange, ringing silence. The black car left. My sisters didn't call back. The world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for my next move. The choice was made, but the consequences were just beginning. I took the money from the footlocker, my mother's war chest, and deposited it in a new bank account in town, with Mr. Abernathy's guidance. The first thing I bought wasn't a car or new clothes. It was a heavy-duty padlock for the shed door, a generator, a portable heater, and a stack of books on small-scale construction and property law. The work began. It was slow, back-breaking, and lonely. I started by cleaning. I spent a week just clearing out the dust and grime from the shed, washing the walls, cleaning the tools until they gleamed. I repaired the broken window pane. I patched the leak in the roof. With every small act of repair, I felt like I was healing a part of myself. I used some of the money to pay the property taxes for the next 5 years, a move Mr. Abernathy applauded. "Show them you're here to stay," he'd said. The developer's deal for the main farm collapsed. Without the easement, their plans were unworkable. The sold sign came down. My sisters were left with a decaying, unsellable property and a mountain of debt from back taxes they had neglected to pay. I heard through Mr. Abernathy that they were furious, threatening lawsuits, but their legal position was non-existent. They had no claim on my land, and their own negligence had ruined the value of theirs. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a quiet, sad sense of justice. This was the natural consequence of their greed. My new life took shape within the four walls of the shed. I built a small, raised loft for a bed. I ran a proper electrical line, with the help of a retired electrician from town who had known my mother and refused to take more than a token payment. He told me stories about her, about how she'd once rewired his whole barn in exchange for a side of beef. "Your mom was good people," he said, looking at me with her same eyes. "You've got her hands." Slowly, tentative connections to the community began to form. The man at the hardware store started greeting me by name. The bus driver who remembered me would honk and wave when he drove past. These were small things, but after years of anonymity, they felt monumental. It was a hard life. Some nights, the loneliness was a physical ache. I missed my mother with a ferocity that stole my breath. But then I would look at her workbench, at the tools hanging on the wall, and I would feel her presence. I was not just living in her shed. I was continuing her work. I was uncovering the person she had known was inside me all along. Months passed. The raw wound of my grief began to scar over, turning into something I could live with, something that was a part of me, like the color of my eyes. The anger at my sisters faded into a distant, weary pity. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. Winter came, blanketing the farm in a thick layer of snow. The shed was warm and bright, a tiny beacon of light in the vast, quiet landscape. I had installed a small wood stove, and the scent of burning oak filled the air, mingling with the familiar smell of oil and sawdust. From my single, repaired window, I could see the whole farm, resting under the snow. It looked peaceful, clean, purified. The ugliness of the "for sale" sign was a distant memory. One morning, a letter arrived. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was a handwritten note on plain paper, left in the mailbox at the end of the driveway. It was from Megan, the younger of my two sisters. "Chloe," it read, "Brianna has gone back to the city. She wants nothing more to do with this place. I know you won't believe me, but I'm sorry. I never wanted it to be like this. Mom, she was different with you. Better. I think I was always jealous of that. The farm is in foreclosure. The bank is taking it. I don't have the money to fight it. I just wanted you to know. Maybe it's for the best. It was never really ours anyway." I read the letter several times. There was no apology for the neglect, for the years of silence. But there was a crack in the armor, a sliver of something that resembled regret. The foreclosure was inevitable. I had known it was coming. They had run the property into the ground. A few weeks later, a new sign went up at the end of the driveway. "Bank auction." My heart sank. After everything I had done to stop the developers, was I going to lose it all to a bank? Was some stranger going to buy the land, surround my little shed, and eventually squeeze me out? I called Mr. Abernathy, my voice tight with panic. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, his voice calm and steady as ever. "We go to the auction." The auction was held on a cold, bright Saturday morning on the steps of the county courthouse. There were a few local farmers, some hopeful young couples, and two men in suits who I recognized as being from a different development company. My hope withered. I couldn't outbid a developer. I stood next to Mr. Abernathy, my hands shoved deep in my pockets, my mother's freedom money, feeling pitifully small. The auctioneer began. The bidding started low, then climbed steadily. The local farmers dropped out quickly. It came down to the two developers. The price went past what the farm was worth, then far beyond. They weren't just bidding on land. They were bidding on a future project. The price hit a number that made me feel sick. It was over. And then Mr. Abernathy raised his hand. "There is a condition on this sale that all bidders must be made aware of," he said, his voice carrying in the crisp air. The auctioneer paused, annoyed. "What is it, counselor?" "The sale of this 150-acre property," Mr. Abernathy announced, "is subject to a pre-existing and non-negotiable primary utility and access easement held by an adjacent private landowner. Any development or use of the land will require a separate and legally binding agreement with that landowner, A murmur went through the small crowd. The two men in suits looked at each other, then at a map they were holding. Their faces fell. They hadn't done their homework as thoroughly as Horizon Properties. The auctioneer, legally obligated, repeated the condition. He tried to restart the bidding. One of the developers shook his head and walked away. The other one hesitated, then did the same. The bidding had stalled. "Do I have any other bids?" The auctioneer called out, his voice losing its confident boom. Silence. I stood there, stunned. Mr. Abernathy hadn't just armed me. He had used my weapon to clear the field. "In that case," he said, his voice quiet but clear. He named a number. It was low. An insultingly low bid that was just a fraction above the opening price. The auctioneer looked around desperately. Going once. Going twice. He slammed his gavel down. Sold. It took me a moment to understand. I looked at Mr. Abernathy, my eyes wide. What just happened?" "We just bought a farm, Miss Morgan," he said, a genuine, wide smile spreading across his face. "Or rather, you did. Using a portion of your inheritance and a small, very favorable loan which my firm is happy to provide." I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. The entire 150 acres. The house. The barn. The fields. The maple trees. It was all mine. I started to cry right there on the courthouse steps. Not tears of grief, but tears of overwhelming, impossible joy. The work that followed was immense. The farm was in debt and disrepair. But it was my debt, my disrepair. The money my mother left, which had once seemed like a fortune, was now seed money for a much larger project. I didn't move into the main house. Not right away. It was too full of ghosts, too much a symbol of what had been broken. I stayed in my shed, my command center, and I started the slow, methodical process of bringing the farm back to life. I didn't do it alone. The retired electrician came back. The hardware store owner gave me a line of credit. A young couple who had been at the auction, hoping to start a small organic farm, offered to lease and work a portion of the fields in exchange for a share of the profits. Slowly, the farm began to breathe again. I learned to drive the old tractor my mother had loved. I learned about crop rotation, soil health, and how to fix a leaky roof on a century-old barn. I was not just living a story, I was building one. Home, I realized, wasn't a place you inherit. It's a place you choose, a place you fight for. It's a responsibility you accept. My mother hadn't left me a property. She had left me a purpose. This land wasn't a windfall. It was a task to honor the past and build a future. It's a task I wake up to every single day. And I am not tired. I am hopeful. This whole journey, from that lonely morning on the group home steps to standing here, on my own land, has taught me one profound lesson. Sometimes, the things that we think have been taken from us are just waiting in a different form. Sometimes, a legacy isn't about what you are given, but about what you are asked to become. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. This story was hard to tell, but stories like this matter. They remind us that even when we feel forgotten or powerless, we might have a strength we haven't discovered yet, a hidden key waiting for the right moment. If this resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your own piece of the world, I hope you'll subscribe and join our community. And please, in the comments below, tell me a little about your own story of finding home or of a choice that defined you. I read every one, and I believe with all my heart that sharing our stories is how we build our foundations. It's how we remind each other that we're not alone. Thank you for being here.